The Simpsons is one of those shows that gets a lot easier to appreciate after you're given a look behind the scenes. When you get to know the writers' senses of humor and work ethic, and the historical context behind certain creative choices, it makes you feel a little closer to the show. None of the magic is lost when you view The Simpsons through an analytical perspective. Episodes with overt metatextual themes are the easiest entry point into this lens. Behind the Laughter, Brawl in the Family, Lisa the Boy Scout, all of these episodes encourage you to have an informed opinion on the show and knowledge of facets of its history. I think the most bittersweet meta-episode, however, is Lisa the Simpson from Season 9. This was the final episode to be run by Bill Oakley and Josh Weinstein, who joined the show as writers in Season 4, before being appointed executive producers for Seasons 7 and 8. These episodes, acclaimed to this day, feel climactic, like they were pushing the world of Springfield as far as it could go. By that same token, some fans may say that the show was getting too experimental, indulgent, and disconnected from its roots, especially in Season 8. I personally love this era, but there was a real fear amongst Bill, Josh, and their team that the show's peak was behind it. For context, this was produced before they saw the cold reception the preceding episode, The Principal and the Pauper, would get, and before they handed the show to Mike Scully, who would endure even more criticism over the direction the show was going. This was back when the main argument was just, the show wasn't as funny as it used to be. So, as a grand finale, they, and writer Ned Goldreyer, sought to close out their tenure with more of a message than an episode. And in hindsight, it couldn't be more accurate. The plot is that Lisa gets her lunch from the gas station one day, and it comes with a brain teaser that Martin and Milhouse are able to complete, but which Lisa can't figure out. She stresses over it so much that it affects her ability to play the sax and remember basic things. I think it's human nature to go through these phases of burnout, especially after an annoying experience, so there's a place for a story like this on The Simpsons. After this rough patch, Grandpa tells Lisa about the Simpson gene, how Homer and Bart were also geniuses when they were Lisa's age, but quickly lost their smarts due to genetics. I first watched this episode when I was Lisa's age, and it had a negative effect on me. I too was worried that I would lose my smarts as I got older, mainly because I was an inconsistent student. One term I'd be great at school, and the next I'd be getting poor grades left and right. I can't be the only one who shared Lisa's childhood fear of early onset homification. Lisa the Simpson is an exploration of how much Lisa's intelligence means to her. As one of her defining characteristics, the perceived loss of it is treated like an identity crisis. But here's where the metatext comes in. Lisa the Simpson is a metaphor for The Simpsons. It too was 8 years old when this episode aired in March 1998, and like I said, there were concerns amongst the staff and fandom that it was beginning to decline in quality. It was produced right after an episode already divisive amongst the staff, to say nothing of the fan reception, and was the last to be finished before the show entered its 9th year of production. For a season 1 to 8 purist, this might as well be the series finale of classic Simpsons.
I've hit my mental and creative peak at the tender age of 8. What will my life be like after I descend into mediocrity?
It wasn't just week-to-week consistency that was starting to get spotty, but also the smarts. Lisa fears that her taste in entertainment will get less artistic. After failing to embrace Homer and Bart's love of buildings getting destroyed, she leaves the house on her own to indulge in higher forms of art, like paintings and music and lying to get on TV. I see this as a parallel to her first headlining episode, Moaning Lisa, which is also about her falling into a slump and trying to find ways of coping. That episode was instrumental in shaping the tone of her stories into being more emotional and introspective, so consciously or not, I like this little tribute to that foundation of Lisa's character. But the fear of dumbing and becoming more average is a fear that came true for The Simpsons. There isn't much more to say about the shift in tone the show would go through across the next 4 seasons, but I do want to highlight that the comedy got significantly easier by the end of this era. I could make an hour-long documentary defending Mike Scully. I don't want to demonize him. It was inevitable that a long-running comedy series would go through periods like this where the comedic stylings would change and potentially weaken or negatively affect other aspects of the writing. Bill and Josh predicted that the Simpsons writers' room wouldn't be full of Harvard eggheads forever, so no matter what way you look at it, Lisa's speech to not take your brain for granted is always going to feel a bit sadder with hindsight.
So please, I beg you, don't take your brain for granted. It's the best friend you'll ever have.
But The Simpsons isn't always this high and mighty intellectual showcase, and this episode knows this. That's why we've got a B-plot at the Quickie Mart, where Apu gets distracted by Homer's new interest and forgets that Jasper's been in the freezer aisle for hours. But not just the freezer aisle, but the freezer itself. Maybe outside of Who Shot Mr. Burns, this is the most they've ever done with this guy, and he still barely moves. He'd probably want it that way. Without much thinking, Apu turns his store into a carnival with other side attractions. But a complication arises, the freezer stops working so well, and Jasper breaks free, thinking he's made it into the future.
Moon pie. What a time to be alive.
It's a silly and harmless B-plot to ease our minds a little, but it's also foreshadowing the future of Matt Groening Productions in its own special way. The first episode of his next show, Futurama, which would premiere a year later, is about some guy getting frozen and waking up in the future. Matt might have had old Fostilicus in mind when devising his next show, which is pretty neat. Not to say the A-plot is unfunny, this episode is really funny. It's got Troy McClure in it. Those sentences might as well mean the same thing. Now, I've been pretty positive on Lisa the Simpsons so far, but what drags it down from heaven is the ending, where Homer gets all his relatives from out of town to convince Lisa that the Simpson gene is a hoax. At first, it seems fruitless. All the men who showed up seem to be losers, and while Herb Powell doesn't get mentioned, we already know what happened with him.
His life was an unbridled success until he found out he was a Simpson.
But as it turns out, all the female Simpsons grew up to be successful, giving Lisa hope.
So, all the Simpson women turn out okay.
That's right, sweetie. The defective Simpson gene is on the Y chromosome, so only men are affected.
While this ending does accomplish giving Lisa a happy ending and answer a question that the story had posed, it also poses another question that the show has happily brushed under the rug. The Simpson gene has never been mentioned again. None of these out-of-town relatives have ever been seen beyond this point, and the show has since offered alternate explanations as to why Homer and Bart aren't very smart. They start to imply Bart has ADD in season 11, which contributes to why his smarts vary wildly across different situations. And as for Homer, ever heard of a little company called Crayola?
But of course, for that ending to work, you would have to ignore all the Simpson DNA evidence. And that would be downright nutty.
I don't like this idea that every Simpson born with a Y chromosome is doomed to be a failure, as there are other factors affecting Homer and Bart. Besides, not all future depictions of Bart were so hopeless yet, and Homer already had an inhuman resume, so that has to account for some manner of success in life. And this is ignoring all the character development they've been through. Homer used to not like tomato soup skin, now it's his favorite part. I don't mind a little medical nonsense on The Simpsons. I mean, the whole B-plot of this episode wouldn't exist without it, but this is really contorting the continuity in ways that don't seem mindful. The more uplifting Kappa, where Lisa solves the brain teaser, smooths this all over, but doesn't excuse the fact that it was already getting harder for the team to figure out satisfying endings. This is another problem that would plague the show for a long time after this, so there had to be some self-awareness to these endings by now. We gotta get things back to normal no matter the cost. Consistency was the cost. Lisa the Simpson is not the first time the show dedicated an episode to its fear of aging. Season 8 already had a couple of them, like the Itchy and Scratchy and Poochie show and the Simpsons spin-off Showcase. I wonder if there a reason a lot of fans start to get more critical of what they're watching from this point forward. At least fans who weren't around when the earlier seasons aired. The show itself has now commented that it's become a challenge to compete with its legacy, and keep going as long as Fox wants it to. It was visibly afraid of losing things that its audience kept coming to them for, and inevitably, things changed and people noticed. None of the magic is lost from viewing The Simpsons from an analytical perspective, but maybe some of the enthusiasm. Bill and Josh intended for Lisa the Simpson to be a kappa to their tenure running the show, and all the things they loved most about it.
For this one, we wanted our last one to be one that sort of embodied like our feelings about the show, like the humor and the the depth and, the stuff that could actually make you tear up sometimes.
But I can't gloss over that I don't like the ending they went with. The Simpson gene should have stayed the ramblings of an old coot. That's what it looks like to the show anyway. But when I look at this episode as a whole, it's a great time. Almost a masterpiece. Don't take genius for granted. Not Lisa's genius, not the episode's genius, and not the genius of The Simpsons.
I got it! Woohoo! I mean, splendid.
Why am I such a loser? Why?
Well, your father was a loser, and his father, and his father. It's genetic, man. Don't